The Spot Track Podcast, talking sports contracts, the salary cap, and business of sports.
Welcome to the SpotTrack.com podcast. This is going to be an important conversation today on the SpotTrack.com podcast. I'm Kevin Sylvester, Paul Peck, and the founder of SpotTrack.com, Mike Giannetti. This is going to be the mother of all quarterback off seasons. And
patent pending.
Yeah, patent pending. The mother of all, we love mothers, of all quarterback off seasons in the National Football League. So there's so much to dive into. Who's going to be available? What teams are going to get quarterbacks? Who's willing to throw big money at Kirk Cousins? Who's going to make trades? Who's going to draft quarterbacks? Paul, my head's already spinning.
None of this really ever happens, Mike, which is why it's the mother of all quarterback off seasons, because every year you go into free agency and there's very little that's ever available that makes you even be mildly excited about the position.
Yeah, right. It's been sort of a long time coming, I think, right? We've seen in the past 3 to 4 years teams start to realize that veteran quarterbacks are too expensive, or veteran quarterbacks are more injury prone. And, we had the situation in Dallas, which was obviously lightning in a bug, and Tony Romo was now on TV. But that was a decision they had to make, right? They took a substantial amount of dead cap to keep Tony Romo off the roster. We had a situation with Brock Osweiler where Denver just said no, and clearly that was the right call, except for now they're back to square one again. But this was sort of coming. There are franchises have been making the decision on quarterbacks that hasn't been made before, where maybe 5-6 years ago it was, this is our guy, we're going to pay him and he's going to do the job, or we're not going to win. So we're at a point now, almost a breaking point now, where we've got a mix of youth plus kind of middle of the road guys plus some really nice guys at the top of the list, who are all kind of culminating to this offseason where I'm not sure any of it's going to matter to, the big teams, right? Are those teams really going to be affected by how this pans out? Maybe, maybe not. Is anybody going to get substantially better because of this offseason? That's a question to talk about. Yeah. Because how quickly can, a new guy come in and turn a franchise around? And who's going to stay? Which of these players aren't going to leave their current franchise, whether that's the team's decision or the player's decision. But yeah, there's 14 quarterbacks that we've identified on Spot Track on the latest article. And they're all worth talking about, really. All
right, Kirk Cousins is the one that's most talked about. Matter of fact, I was just in Washington this past weekend, and Earl Forsty hosts a Redskins pregame show. I was working with him, and I bring up Kirk Cousins. He's like, just stop. He's not going anywhere. They're going to keep him. That was his opinion on that. What do you think with Kirk Cousins, and is what happens with Kirk Cousins, does that dictate what happens with everybody else?
Yes and no. Kirk Cousins is sort of on his own island here, where he's been paid a ton of money already, right? He's already made $44 million the last 2 years to be the Redskins quarterback. So he's got all the leverage right now, okay? Because a guy like me who looks at the business side of this looks at a third franchise tag at $34 million and thinks, no way. I mean, there's no way the Redskins can allocate 20% of their salary cap to their quarterback, even if that's the most important position.
A quarterback who has been good but not great, has only taken them to the playoffs once in his 3 years as a starter.
That's right.
There's some Redskins fans who would rather have Jay Schrader back than Kirk Cousins. Just wanted to work Jay Schrader into the
You're dating yourself again,
well
Kyle. Right. So where do I stand on Kirk Cousins? Kirk Cousins, in my opinion, will not be at the Washington Redskins next year. This is going to be a divorce this March. Obviously they've had plenty of chances to sign him to a long-term extension. Maybe that comes. Maybe that's in the works right now. I've heard nothing, to lead me to believe that's happening. But Kirk Cousins is going to get paid. He's got all the leverage. He can say no to Washington at this point. He can certainly walk into free agency in March, and there will be teams. Now, will there be as many teams as might have been last year or 2 years ago? No, because we've got this market of 13, 14 quarterbacks that clearly teams who need a quarterback can look at seriously in terms of a veteran or a younger guy in addition to a draft pick. So there's an awful lot of choices for teams to look at. So Kirk Cousins' value isn't as high as it probably should be. I mean, we haven't had a player of his caliber, even if he's not a great player, we haven't had a player of his caliber hit the market since maybe Drew Brees, a situation where Brees wasn't loved in San Diego.
Brees was coming off what some thought was a potential career-ending injury at the time, so it's almost not even really a great comparison.
Right. So Cousins has done more than that. He's been healthy. He's put up production. His stats are there. I mean, he's a bona fide starting quarterback in terms of his production. So He just needs a better situation, and he's got all the leverage. He's got the decision to make. He knows how much money he's worth because they've already paid him 2 years of top money. So we've laid out a situation where some team can throw, $25 million plus per year for Kirk Cousins. That's going to happen. If he's able to walk into March, he's going to get $25 million a year, just because that's where quarterback pay is. That's not even the top pay, right? That's not even where we are yet. We're in a situation where Matt and Ryan and Aaron Rodgers are going to be nearing $30 million a year within the next 18 months. So we're not talking about making him the highest paid quarterback in football, but he's going to get top tier elite pay. We're talking $50 million at least in the first 2 years, possibly in the first year.
Wow.
All right, so
and by the way, before all these are broken down, it's a fantastic piece at SpotTrack.com, and the scenarios that SpotTrack.com and Mike have done on the contracts that these quarterbacks will get.
So on the Kirk Cousins front, if there's no long-term deal in the mix, which doesn't appear that it's going to be
in Washington,
franchise transition, nothing. Well, what are the Redskins? The Redskins still have some of the power here.
They do, in that they can transition tag him, which is $28 million, or they can franchise tag him, which is $34 million. Would they do the former? Possibly. 6 months ago, that might have been a way they were leaning in terms of that $28 million transition tag. Here's the problem with that. If you transition tag Kirk Cousins, that's like a restricted free agent, right? So other teams can throw an offer sheet out there. Washington has an X amount of days to match that. That's going to happen. That's essentially the same thing as putting him on the market at that point, because some team, the Cleveland Browns, the New York Jets, with ample cash and ample cap
way
space,
more cap room than
right.
than the Redskins could ever match.
They're going to highball it. They're going to highball it to a situation where only they can do it, because they know Washington can't and won't. So Washington's putting themselves in a position to not win there by transition tagging him. He's not going to play on $28 million next year. Right? He's not. He's
any trade possibilities at all?
I'd say no at this point. I think if they were to tag him and try to trade him, why? Why at that point?
Right.
Why would another team do that? Right? They don't want him for 1 year.
Well, because maybe you've got a better shot then via a trade than negotiating in free agency with him, because he's already...
Especially if you're worried about Cleveland throwing $50 million at him in the first year, and you can't do that, you might want to try to get in there.
But if you're the Redskins, don't you gain more in compensatory picks? If he signs via free agency and you don't sign, player, if you don't sign Drew Brees, if for some reason the Saints don't want him back, I know they don't want their safety back, but if they don't, we have to get to that, but at some point. But anyway, they'll get something by losing him in compensatory picks in the draft in 2019. They'll get that, but yeah, I think for your Washington, you haven't won anything with him. So if you're losing him...
Jay Gruden made that pretty clear in his postseason press conference without saying it, how good it really is. We didn't make the playoffs.
What are you really losing, right?
You're losing a starting quarterback. Now you got to go get another one, which now takes you into what do we do next?
There's nobody to throw to in Washington. I can't imagine he wants to stay there.
He has nobody to throw to in Washington because Washington's salary cap is full of Kirk Cousins.
Good point.
Also, isn't that a problem for the next team that signs him?
It is a problem unless they structure it in a way similar to how I've laid it out here, which is tenable cap hits over 5 years. Let's be honest, it's a 3-year deal, right?
Right.
They can get out of it after 3 years, but it's a max amount of money for 3 years, structured in a way that the cap hits aren't crazy. I mean, they're less. The two cap hits I have laid out over 18 and 19 are less than the franchise tag he just played on in last year. So this was always the better business way to do it in terms of Washington structuring their cap and keeping Kirk Cousins their quarterback. This is just the way some team has to go. This is the way you handle a high paid salary on your roster. You structure it so that cap can spread out, but you do it so that you're not dealing with guaranteed money down the road. You know what I mean? You structure it so that it's kind of a pay as you go system. A lot of teams are doing this now. And look, obviously it's something Kirk Cousins will agree to. He's done it for 2 years. He's been on 1 year pay-as-you-go tenders for 2 years now. So he's got leverage, but a team with a ton of money can structure a really nice deal to bring him in, let him do his thing, pay him $70 million for 3 years, and then let him loose.
Where do you think he goes?
I think it's Cleveland Browns all day.
with a huge amount of money up front.
I do. I think
in order to
Cleveland
guarantee they get him, and because they can, and he's a Midwest guy, so he may be willing to go up there.
I think Cleveland has all of the assets in place. They have an offense that's getting better. They've got draft assets to make it better this year. They've got a good offensive line, which they addressed last year in free agency. That's getting better. They might have to replace Joe Thomas, the left tackle, who took an injury last year and is on the wrong side of Father Time. But they are an up-and-coming franchise. Yes, I realize I'm talking about a team that didn't win any games this year. but the signs are pointing in the right direction. And Kirk Cousins can fix the quarterback position this year. He's a bona fide, experienced starter. He's not Peyton Manning. He's not Tom Brady. But he can come in. He can run an offense. He's a gunslinger, so he's going to be exciting in terms of making your offense better. He would love a weapon like Josh Gordon, let's be honest. He hasn't had a Josh Gordon in 3 years.
Now they have the Browns, by the way.
What's that?
Now they have the Browns.
Yeah. That's for a different story. But Kirk Cousins is an upgrade for the Browns. They have the money to get him. They can throw a silly front-loaded deal like Matthew Stafford just got in Detroit and kind of blow out the competition right off the bat, and I think that's the end point.
All right, so as we continue talking about the other quarterbacks, the reason why this goes beyond just Kirk Cousins, and you've identified the following potential guys that are going to be free agents this year: Drew Brees, Case Keenum, Jimmy Garoppolo, Jay Cutler, Josh McCown, Sam Bradford, all essentially starting quarterbacks at various points this season. Now, all that said, I think your follow-up here, Mike, is that while guys like Brees and Garoppolo are going to be free agents, technically they're really not going to be free.
Yeah, let's just take them off the board right now. There's no indication that Brees is going anywhere.
I think he said after the loss that I'll be back next year.
I'll tell you what, he in the play. If you didn't think Drew Brees was good before this year's playoffs, you weren't paying attention.
Right. And then why would he
phenomenal.
want to leave? He's in a perfect situation there.
He's great.
It's worth talking about, though, because there's a unique situation with his contract that's going to make this a little bit of an arduous process. Now, if you remember, it took a while to get last year's extension done. They did a 1-year extension, but it was past the point of free agency. So they've taken their time with Brees, and really what they did is they structured an extension last time that hurt them this time. So Brees has $18 million in dead cap right now, without a contract. That's going to void, and the $18 million will remain with the Saints. So here's how they alleviate that.
Even if they re-sign him, they still have to deal with that.
No, that's how they alleviate it. So by signing him to at least a 3-year deal right now, they can spread that $18 million out $6 million over the next 3 years. Now that's just the start. That's without any new money, right? So if they give him another signing bonus and new salaries, obviously, that's going to add on top of that $18 million. So they're going to have to be really, smart about how they structure this extension, or they're going to have $35 million cap hits, over the next couple of years. So, I've laid out a scenario where there's a 3-year, $75 million extension with $50 million plus guaranteed, basically 2 years fully guaranteed for Drew Brees. There's a small signing bonus. I've got a $15 million signing bonus to go with that. Just because you have to pay Drew Brees $30 million this year. You just do. I mean, he's a Hall of
However
Famer.
you're going to get there, it's
it.
got to be there. Yeah.
He's going to walk in the door and say, make it work. I need $30 million. I want to be on this team for at least another year. So, the way I've kind of laid it out is one way to do it. But, you're still looking at a $31 million cap hit next year in 2019, 2 years from now. So is that going to be tenable? Will the salary cap be $185 million in 2 years? I think maybe
it's actually going to be a bazillion.
Oh, is that the word? Yeah. No, that's the NBA, actually.
That's right.
No, so
yeah, he's staying there.
He's definitely staying. It's just going to be a matter of making the math work, and they're going to take the next month and get that done.
All right, Garoppolo, he's not going anywhere. San Francisco did not give up what they gave up to get him. Franchise tag likely there, or a long-term deal, obviously.
Franchise tag definitely, for sure. As soon as possible, within a minute of the window opening, they'll be franchise tagging him. They may exclusively franchise tag him, actually, just to make sure nobody can throw their, like Cleveland can throw their hat in the ring. That's actually a pretty smart way to go in terms of making sure that he's on the roster.
And Cleveland did want him.
Oh, yeah. No question. Yeah, there was reports.
Patriots just didn't have any interest in trading him there.
Yeah.
If you believe all the reports that Belichick would not trade him to Cleveland.
Right.
Now, was that because they didn't want him in the AFC, or
Probably.
Is that because he had an axe to grind with Cleveland?
Maybe both. Maybe both. But
probably both.
But
sure.
More likely, Belichick wouldn't want to trade him. Again, it's fascinating. Belichick will trade a quarterback within the division if he's not really worried about having to play him 2 years Drew Bledsoe to the Bills would be the example of that. But if he is worried about him, he's going to want to get him as far away as possible and only have to see him, twice every 4 years. That tells me that's why he wound up in San Francisco.
Well, I think it's interesting that he's about to let his offensive coordinator go to Indianapolis, though. We'll see how that works out.
Probably a clause in those contracts for those positions that if you can become a head coach, you've got to let him go.
Yeah, I mean, there's no control over that. I mean, and I think some of that is Belichick these guys have been good soldiers for him, and he's going to let them go where they need to go.
That's an owner-to-owner deal, too, right? I mean, the ownership's a group. Hey, look, I want to hire your guy to be a head coach. You've got to let him go. If you don't let him go, then you're never going to get a guy to coach for you.
That's right.
Frankly, so which makes that fascinating. All right, so Garoppolo stays there. Case Keenum, to me, is fascinating.
Very interesting.
Because if they did Case Keenum, right? I mean, even before the playoffs, you're like, boy, it's going to stay
He's shown
there.
nothing in his previous career to make you think this was the kind of season he would have.
And because of one wacky play, I want to be fair to the safety, Williams. I'll just call it a wacky play, all right, to be kind here. All right. Because of one horrible defensive play, what the hell was the guy thinking? Case Keenum now is a quarterback in Minnesota. How can you not have the guy?
There are a lot of people, myself included, who think that wacky, crazy play may have scored Case Keenum $23 million.
Sure it did.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I think you get your team into the NFC Championship and a chance to play a home Super Bowl.
Right.
and there's no way they let him walk. I'm pretty positive they're going to franchise tag him, at least to keep him in the fold and designate him as the starting quarterback. And it makes sense,
Mike, because I think there are still some questions whether he can do that 2 years in a row or not. So by franchise tagging him, you sort of alleviate yourself of having to worry that if he goes back to being the Case Keenum that was cut twice by two different teams, then you're not locked into him on a long-term deal.
Yeah, there's a chance that this was always going to be the plan, right? That this was, he's the guy, he's the soldier who's taken us this far, and we're going to run with him in 2018 no matter what. Just because they've gutted their quarterback depth at this point, so they're going to have to rebuild from the ground up anyway. I think it's set in stone at this point. He's going to be the $23 million franchise tag. It's going to be the one-year deal. I don't think they'll get a deal done with him. I don't think they'll look to extend him in maybe mid-season, maybe 6 weeks
I think
in.
you need to see it more again.
Sure.
You need to see it again, right?
Sure.
You need to worry that the league doesn't catch up with them or that their defense doesn't take a step back and now it's back on his shoulders and he may not have the capability of doing it.
Does that keep Teddy Bridgewater in Minnesota if you just franchise tag Case Keenum? Does that keep Teddy Bridgewater there?
It doesn't. I think Minnesota is going to give Bridgewater every chance to start somewhere else. I think he's earned that right, and that's a beloved figure in that city. I'll tell you where I like him, and it's not going to be a good chance to start, but I like him in Houston. I like him backing up Deshaun Watson, maybe a little bit of a veteran presence, maybe a chance to compete for that job if Watson's not healthy to start the year. That's a little bit back and forth. They're similar players. They're similar injuries.
Sure,
but that I like him as sort of a figure on that Houston.
You don't think there's a market for Bridgewater to go start somewhere with so many teams needing quarterbacks?
I've got an article with 14 quarterbacks here, and none of them is Teddy Bridgewater. So I think there are so many options that a guy like that with injury history, I can't even find a place for Sam Bradford on this list. He's here, but I'm not sure he's a starting quarterback in 2018.
No, I don't think he is anymore.
Yeah,
I can't imagine a team is willing to make a commitment to Sam Bradford based on his inability to stay healthy. And frankly, his performances have been up and down even when he has started. I think he's headed towards being a backup, but Sam Bradford's the kind of guy who's a backup who will wind up starting for you. Right?
The Jets. He'll be the Jets quarterback.
He could be.
He could be the Jets quarterback next year. By the way, Case Keenum and Nick Foles are going to be the starting quarterbacks in the NFC Championship game, right?
Teammates with the St. Louis Rams.
Right. And they were moved because of Bradford, correct?
That's right.
In both cases.
Yes.
And obviously in Wentz, too. And I think I'm right when I say both Keenum and Foles were cut twice by the St. Louis Rams.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, it's all come full circle.
And it was a really cool thing. I saw this piece social media. John Gruden, his quarterback camp when they come out, which he won't be doing anymore because now he's the coach of the Raiders.
Quarterback camp will be Raiders training camp.
Yeah, it will be Raiders training camp. And he had Case Keenum in there, and he's talking to him, and he just goes, you know what? Draft position's not going to matter for you. You're going to get a chance someday, kid. Case Keenum, you're going to get a chance someday. Don't you worry about it. And he's got his chance here in his moment in the sun. All right, so we've Jay Cutler, Josh McCown. Those are other potential free agent quarterbacks.
Cutler's I would think, goes back to being retired, and McCown only sits around and waits for someone to be so desperate to have no other choice but to bring him in as a doubtful as a starter.
Alex Smith.
All right, so now to the guys who aren't free agents.
Yeah. These are quarterbacks,
but likely to be moving.
They're on the bubble, and I'm going to go to the list here, and it's an interesting list. Alex Smith, Blake Bortles, which I don't know if his fate has changed from what he. By the way, that was not the Blake Bortles that played against Buffalo in the playoffs. That was unbelievable.
It might be the Blake Bortles against New England this weekend that might be much like the one from the first playoff game.
Yeah, you have Tyrod Taylor, Andy Dalton's an interesting name, Eli Manning, Nick Foles, Mike Glennon. So let's start with Alex Smith here, former number 1 overall pick, 33 years old. Someone's going to get Alex Smith, and they're going to like to have Alex Smith.
Yeah, so Alex Smith has been an interesting figure since before 2017, really, because the Chiefs obviously took the draft pick and Patrick Mahomes. A lot of smoke was made in terms of Smith's future this year. He had a really great start to 2017. He was an MVP candidate halfway through this year.
Right.
So then the Chiefs and him both kind of curtailed off, and obviously there was the first-round exit. So we're in a holding point with the Chiefs at this point, because not only is Alex Smith kind of on the bubble, but the entire roster is on the bubble at this point. They are in cap hell. They are in negative cap space right now. So really that front office is just kind of looking at every facet of that roster to figure out what to do. Well, I can tell you right now, they can clear $17 million by removing Alex Smith from the fold. So are they going to have trade candidates? That's really the question here. Is to me, it's not will they release or trade him. It's which one will they do. I'm worried that a trade won't be available because of these options, because there's so much here. There's so much in the draft, supposedly.
Right.
I'm worried that a trade won't be plausible. It won't matter financially to Kansas City. It'll be really just about getting something for Alex Smith at this point. So if it's going to be a trade, the assets aren't going to be great. The return's not going to be great. I mean, let's be fair.
You don't think they can get a pretty good draft pick for a legitimate starting quarterback, or does everybody just think they're going to know they're going to cut him?
Could Buffalo get a draft pick for
Tyrod I've heard
Taylor?
some speculation. Well, no, you mentioned Buffalo, and certainly there's some speculation that this could be a place for him. Would the Bills take the draft pick that they got from the Chiefs in the trade last year, which would be 22nd overall, and wheel that back to Kansas City for Alex Smith?
No. No, I know.
Kevin has spoken.
Well, no, I think that would be. I think they got that draft pick with a chance to get one of these quarterbacks.
But
in the draft.
But from when you look at a Buffalo example at 21 and 22, to have to go up and to get one of those quarterbacks in the top 10, you're going to have to give those two picks up, maybe one if not both of the seconds that the Bills have. And frankly, the discussions may very well take you to next year's number 1. So if you're a team like Buffalo and you're like, boy, we like Darnold, Rosen, but we don't love him, or we don't love him enough to give all of that up to go get him, if we can offer Kansas City back its first-round pick to get Alex Smith to be our quarterback for the next 2 years.
All right, how much better is Alex Smith?
That's right.
Than Tyrod Taylor?
Right.
Better, but not a lot.
Okay,
in my opinion.
So
yeah, but better. I mean, he's better. Alex Smith had a really good year this year. You can debate, and I think that's what's going on in Kansas City, whether there's a ceiling for Alex Smith. He only gets you so far, but if you're not pushing that ceiling like the Chiefs are, then there could be a lot of space between where you are and the ceiling.
So the only way I think a trade really does happen, really, is if there's a team who just knows they can't reach. They're not a high draft pick. They're not going to be one of those top draft quarterbacks, and they're obviously out in Kirk Cousins. Maybe they're out on a couple of the other players, right? To me, the franchise that ends up with Alex Smith is the Arizona Cardinals. That's a situation where they just lost their veteran quarterback. They've got a decent receiving core, right? But they're going to be rebuilding a lot of that team. I think Alex Smith is a nice fit for multiple years, not just a 1-year rental deal. I think he's a Band-Aid for them over the next 3 to 4 seasons as they kind of restructure and figure out their feet and figure out what they're doing. But they need to keep Larry Fitzgerald happy right now. That he's on a 1-year extension. He's probably contemplating retirement right now because of the situation at hand. So I think Alex Smith is a good fit for that kind of a franchise who's defensive heavy, needs a better offense, obviously a younger offense. 33 is not old for a quarterback. It's not, and he's shown consistency.
You can have 4 to 5 more years as a starter.
No question. So I think a team like that who, they've done nothing to get themselves younger in terms of that quarterback position. They've done nothing. They've swung and missed. They've been rolling with, Whedon and Drew Stanton over the last couple of years just to kind of replace Carson Palmer. So to me, that's the franchise where Alex Smith ends up. Is that a trade? Maybe. I just don't think with this market that a trade is viable. I think teams will wait out releases.
All right, you have Andy Dalton on this list.
Yep.
And he's 30 years old, made a great play in the playoffs, made a lot of news because of getting Buffalo into the playoffs with the pass that he threw. Saved Marvin Lewis's job with that play. We got a 2-year extension. I mean, that pass did so many different things for the Bengals and children in need and for a Buffalo franchise. So why is Andy Dalton on the bubble?
Andy Dalton has always been on my bubble for 2018. You mentioned Marvin Lewis. Marvin Lewis is probably a reason that Andy Dalton isn't on the bubble anymore. Because my thinking was, with the way that Cincinnati season was trending, was that everything was going to just kind of break down and blow up in Cincinnati this year. So that didn't happen, for whatever reason. But Marvin Lewis is still here. They're going to blow up some pieces for sure. But at this point, I would say Andy Dalton is trending away from the bubble just because.
But he's on the bubble because of the other guy they have on their roster,
That's right.
I think.
That's right. So the only point to make in terms of Dalton right now is that A.J. Mccarron has a unique situation coming up here in the next month. February 15th, he has a court date where he has appealed his free agency status. He was a non-football injury participant his first year, where a situation is where they essentially pay him a prorated salary, but he doesn't accrue that year. So technically speaking, he is a restricted free agent right now. Well, he has appealed that, and he is trying to make himself an unrestricted free agent because he wants to play football, and he hasn't had the chance to do that. So if A.J. Mccarron is deemed a restricted free agent in February, that would give a month for the Cincinnati Bengals to kind of figure out what their future is. Because if they like him and if they think he's a potential quarterback of their future, even with Marvin Lewis in the fold now, I think there's a situation where maybe they pen him to a new deal, extend him for a couple of years, give him a little bridge contract, and Andy Dalton is thrown by the wayside at that point. So to me, that's the only scenario where Dalton is probably off this roster in 2018. And that'll be deemed in February 15th.
And remember, there was nearly a trade for A.J. Mccarron to the Cleveland Browns for play with his old head coach, Hugh Jackson. So if that could be in the mix as well, too. Maybe Cleveland decides that's the direction they want to go. Or maybe another quarterback-needy team comes to Cincinnati and says, we'll make you an offer. We want A.J. Mccarron, either whether he's an unrestricted free agent or not.
It's interesting. I mean, the names just keep piling up on this quarterback list. It's really an unbelievable offseason.
All right, let's get to some more of them then. Blake Bortles, I think, we can move through Blake probably quicker than we could a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, 6 weeks ago, Blake Bortles was cut. He was released. He was not going to make $19 million in Jacksonville next year. It's really hard to say no now. It's really hard to say that he won't be back. I don't think they'll extend him. I've said if they're going to keep him, they should extend him. I'm off that now. I think a $19 million 1-year deal essentially is what it's going to be, similar to Case Keenum, right? Case Keenum's done enough.
Prove it.
Blake Bortles has done enough in 2017. He's going to have to show that he's improved consistently. We talked about the last 2 weeks. They've been yin and yang, right, in terms of Blake Bortles. So I think a 1-year, $19 million fifth-year option year is perfect for Jacksonville to see what they have one more time. And we'll probably be talking about this again next year.
Tyrod Taylor.
I'm the only person on an island, I think, right now that thinks the Bills should keep Tyrod Taylor for one more year. But and that's just business. That's just business because the Bills are certainly going to take a quarterback in the draft this year. There's no question about that. You're talking Alex Smith. There may be another veteran out there for them. But that's going to cost them assets. That's going to cost them money. They've already allocated $16.5 million to Tyrod Taylor in terms of salary for next year, $18 million against the cap. Those are average numbers. That's nothing money in terms of the quarterback position. And it sure looks like they're going to need a quarterback to start 2018 next year that's not coming out of the draft because it doesn't seem likely that they're going to reach high enough to get those top 2 quarterbacks, which are bona fide starting quarterbacks in the league, we think. So if I'm looking at Tyrod Taylor, I think he's on a nice 1-year, $16 million deal with the Buffalo Bills to kind of bridge the gap before they figure out where they're going in the next 2 years. But all the signs out of Buffalo certainly sound like Tyrod Taylor's tenure is done there. So does he have a starting job next year? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if Tyrod Taylor has shown enough. He's been inconsistent. He's certainly got a ceiling in terms of his passing ability. He's been injury prone now a couple times and certainly took a heck of a hit in his last game here in the playoffs. But I'm not sure. I think maybe he's an odd man out in terms of this list and in terms of starting quarterbacks in 2018. But we'll see. It'll be interesting to see if Buffalo does make the move.
All right. How about the Giants and Eli Manning? And if the reports are accurate, they're going to hire Minnesota's Pat Shurmur as their head coach, which means he may be more inclined to want to bring Bradford or Bridgewater in.
Yeah, and that's why we keep the names rolling. That's why it's the mother of all off seasons for quarterbacks. Yeah, Eli Manning, and Paul brings up a great point with Pat Shurmur there.
No question. The Giants are obviously restructuring that offense right now, and their front office as well. So, will Eli Manning want to be around for this? Is really what I'm thinking. I'm thinking less about the Giants wanting to do this and more about what does Eli want to do right now, because I think he's probably earned that decision in terms of where he wants to be over the next 2 years. I think there's a very good chance Eli Manning is on the trade block. We've talked about trades with Alex Smith and a couple of guys. Eli Manning is probably going to be traded this year. I think Eli Manning's tenure in New York is done.
He's being traded to Denver.
I think that's probably right.
How about that?
I think that's probably right. I've sort of left Denver off this list because that's always been in the back of my head that Eli is going to end up there. He'll have some shoes to fill with his brother. But
used to that.
That's right. But I do think that's going to happen. I'm sort of limping into that conversation because it's not an easy move for the Giants to make because I'm not sure they have their quarterback of the future yet either. So like you said, will Shurmur bring one of his guys from Minnesota or one of these other options that we've talked about, headed for New York this offseason? But I do think Eli gets moved this offseason.
All right, and a couple other names to wrap all this up. Mike Glennon may go down as the most overpriced, worst quarterback signing ever, but I understand that the Bears had to get a quarterback in case they couldn't get who they wanted in the draft, but when they did, then that made Mike Glennon useless.
Yeah, so I put Mike Glennon on this list just so you remembered he still had a contract next year because 3 weeks into 2017, it almost there wasn't a need for one. But yeah, the Bears are going to pay him $18.5 million over the course of the past 12 months just to have him for a couple games and toss him aside. And
that guy should be sending his agent like the best bottle of scotch at Christmas.
Wait until somebody else signs him to start this year. Wait till he does that.
You know who he owes the money to is John Elway. Because when John Elway said no to Brock Osweiler, it put Brock Osweiler on the market where there has never been a quarterback that young with that much ceiling on the market in the past 5 years, right? And Osweiler got $72 million from Houston. And that's the contract that all of these kind of no-name quarterbacks are being based off of, right? That $18 million per year. That's exactly what Glennon got, right? That's the number that these kind of backup quarterbacks who are finally getting their chance. We're talking about A.J. Mccarron, right? That's sort of the number. That's the framework. That Brock Osweiler contract was sort of like the start of all of this. So yeah, the Glennon deal was nuts in hindsight. I mean, they turned it around 2 weeks later and drafted Trubisky. So, yeah. Somewhere there was a disconnect between free agency and the draft in terms of where the Bears were going. And yeah, that'll go down as one of those head scratchers for sure.
And then the last one to talk about is wherever Nick Foles takes the Eagles, which potentially could be to a Super Bowl championship, his tenure is done for next year when Carson Wentz comes back. So what happens to Nick Foles?
Nick Foles is very interesting because Nick Foles has a lot of starting experience. Nick Foles has bounced around, but he's started. He's played football wherever he's been. So, obviously his ceiling is not as high as many of these names we've talked about today, but he's a viable quarterback. And what I've got him labeled at is that bridge guy, right? So let's say the Bills move on from Tyrod Taylor, right? As many speculate. Nick Foles might be a perfect little 1-year cheap deal for the Bills who need a veteran starting quarterback to get them through this draft process where they're going to take a first-round pick probably and try to groom him into the franchise quarterback. Nick Foles isn't going to cost near as much as an Alex Smith would cost or an Andy Dalton would cost in theory. So you're looking at a situation where he might be a really good plan B option for a couple of these teams who maybe things don't work out exactly like they want this offseason, and he just sort of falls in their lap.
It is going to be fascinating to see where the quarterbacks land this offseason, the draft, pre-draft quarterback moves, post-draft quarterback moves with quarterbacks at the draft, It's going to be great. Now, all the important dates are laid out there on SpotTrack.com in the quarterback piece, so make sure you go on there and check all of that out. As you can see, I mean, we've gone over a half an hour here with the discussion on just those quarterbacks, and there are more potential to be some that even pop up even more. So check it all out at SpotTrack.com, something we'll certainly follow along in the offseason. Thanks for listening to the SpotTrack.com podcast. For Mike Giannetti from SpotTrack.com, Paul Peck from Paul Peck, I'm Kevin Sylvester. Thanks for listening.